All right. Good day, everyone. And thank you for joining today's Ask Me Anything, where we answer your questions about cannabis legalization in New York. We do this every Wednesday at 4:20 p.m. New York City time. I'd like to welcome back those of you who have joined us before in a previous Ask Me Anything session. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, I hope you'll make it a regular occurrence. My name is Jeffrey Hoffman, and I am an attorney here in New York whose legal practice focuses entirely on cannabis. If you would like to contact me, you can do that either here on LinkedIn. I welcome all connection requests, or you can contact me at my email address, which you can see on the screen below, info@420jurist.com, which I guess you might say makes me the 420 jurist. And as the 420 jurist, I will be answering your questions, roughly half of them from a list of questions I've gotten from previous Ask Me Anything sessions, and roughly half of the questions which you post in the comments here today. So if you'd like to ask a question, now is the time to do so. As always, would like to provide my usual disclaimer, and that is that I am indeed an attorney, but I am not your attorney, at least not yet. Though I do see a few of my clients are in the event today, so don't want you guys to worry. I am still your attorney. But for the rest of you, I am not your attorney, and today's event is not legal advice. It does not create an attorney-client relationship, and it is not a solicitation to offer legal advice. And so, with that, let's get to the questions. All right. So the first question today came in during the week to the comments in the posting about today's event. And it is, if a person has a previous felony of marijuana, I assume they mean a conviction of marijuana, they seem to have some sort of priority to obtaining legal cannabis permits. If the felony was in a different state than you live in, how would that work? And I apologize, I was laughing a little bit at the question, just because, as everyone here in New York is quite familiar with, we are deep in the throes of being in the application window for the conditional adult use retail dispensary license. And as the question asker indicated, there is indeed some sort of priority to obtaining legal cannabis permits for folks. They were a little off in their description, but what it is for folks that have a cannabis-related conviction in the state of New York prior to March 31st, 2021. And so that was either you were convicted of a cannabis offense, or you were arrested for a cannabis offense and then convicted of some type of follow-on or reduced crime. Very often, folks would get arrested for cannabis and then convicted of loitering or disturbing the peace or other some format of conviction. And any of those convictions will suffice to qualify for the initial conditional adult use retail dispensary license. The other part of that is, of course, you were a 10% owner of a business that was profitable for at least 2 years. But if you met those two requirements, you absolutely can now apply for the conditional adult use retail dispensary license here in New York. Now, to be more specific to what the question asker was asking, what if the felony was in a different state than you live in, or the question was than you live, and that could mean a lot of different things. But generally, I think the way the question should be looked at is, if you were convicted of a cannabis crime in another state, will that work in New York? The answer to that is no. Here for the initial conditional adult use retail dispensary license, the conviction had to be here in the state of New York. So that's not going to work out. As the question, I guess, was asking, how would it work out? if your felony was from a different state. And unfortunately for those individuals, it just doesn't work out. In order to be eligible, again, conviction of a cannabis or cannabis-related offense in the state of New York, that is here in this state, prior to March 31st, 2021, and of course, the business ownership requirement. If you were convicted in another state, unfortunately, that does you no good here. All right, let's go to a question that we got in the comments here today. Is there a specific license or registration requirement in New York for the production of THC or CBD infused beverages? So you obviously would need a processor license in order to create THC or CBD infused beverages here in the state of New York. There are processor licenses for CBD products. The folks that had the processing license for the hemp products, for the CBD products, and who actually did that for a couple of years, are currently eligible to apply for the conditional processing license here in New York. And that will allow them to process both CBD beverages and THC beverages. We do not have the final regulations related to the production of these beverages. We're waiting with bated breath. Everyone here is in New York for the regulations related to the adult use market here in the state. And I'm sure we will see a lot of regulations related to beverages and how you go about producing them, and perhaps how many a person can buy and drink at one time. Perhaps will be strictly related to the cannabis concentrate amount, although I don't think they're going to let you buy and consume 24 grams of concentrate right there on site. So I'm sure they'll have something different for beverages, particularly for on-site beverage consumption. We're simply waiting for those regulations now. But yes, indeed, there will be a specific regulation. And so I guess we could call a license or registration requirement. I guess once you got the license, the regulations are the rules you're going to have to follow. So I guess that counts. But yes, there will indeed be specific regulations related to the production of such beverages. And I, like every other lawyer, like everyone else in the cannabis industry here in New York, is simply waiting for those regulations to be promulgated by the Cannabis Control Board. And then we'll have a lot more information for you about what the cannabis beverage world will look like here in the state of New York. All right, let's get to another question. Any update on how it will be scored? And I think what the how is referring to is the conditional adult use retail dispensary license application. Did they release a scoring rubric? So they sort of released a rubric that didn't include any point totals with it. So we know, for example, and we've had this rubric for a while. This is nothing new. We knew this previously when some other folks asked a similar question. So we know what some of the elements are. So, for example, as we all know, an individual that was convicted can apply for this first license, as can one of their parents or both of their parents, frankly, or their dependents or children. And we don't know how many more points if the individual who applies is also the convicted individual will get versus how many points their parent or their children will get. Similarly, we know that there will be different amounts of points based on what the qualifying business was. So if the qualifying business looks like a cannabis dispensary, where it was a retail operation where members of the public came into the store and bought retail goods there in the store, you're going to get more points than if your qualifying business does not look like a cannabis dispensary. Perhaps if it was a wholesale business or some other type of retail business that had no retail store or retail components. You'll definitely get more points if you were more like a bodega and look more like a dispensary, but we don't know how many more points. So that is going to really be the $1 million question here, is what is the point total breakdown going to be for these criteria that the Cannabis Control Board and the OCM are going to use for reviewing these applications. And I just think they have to be very, very careful here. The idea of going through a regulatory process and issuing licenses based on some type of regulatory point scheme rubric where we did not know ahead of time what the point scheme would be, I think potentially opens this whole process up to litigation. So I think the Cannabis Control Board and the OCM just need to be very careful when they come to making these final decisions about who gets the license and what the point system is going to be for these different components. All right. Let's go to another question. Hey, Frank, glad that you're sneaking in from work. You know, it's 4:20. You should be smoking a joint instead of working anyway and listening to me opine about cannabis. That's what everybody should be doing on Wednesday at 4:20. But anyway, good to see you, Frank. Question from Eric. When do you think the first wave of adult use recreational dispensaries outside of New York City will be open for business? Would a dispensary need a license for delivery purposes? All right, so a couple of really, really good questions there. So when do I think the first wave of adult use dispensaries will open for business? And the questioner asked outside of New York City, because of those of you that live here with me in New York City and have done any construction ever, know they can take you 3 months just to pull your permits. So it's going to be a while before dispensaries open here in New York City. Even if they gave us licenses tomorrow, it would still be a little while. I do think the state is going to try to open at least one dispensary before the end of the year. They originally, when they talked about doing this conditional adult use retail dispensary license, they were adamant that the first stores would open before the end of the year. I do think that they would like to have a fantastic photo opportunity for the governor, who, by the way, is an incredibly cannabis favorable governor. It does look like she's probably going to win here in November. But if you're in the cannabis industry, I don't really care what your politics are. Her opponent is not cannabis friendly and is not in favor of this cannabis industry we're about to have. So if you're in the cannabis industry, you need to think about that when you go into the voting booth in November. So I do think they're going to try to get that first store, a couple of stores out the door. I think slowly but surely you'll see more conditional adult use stores open as DASNY gets their locations open. I mean, this is going to be slow going. I think it's not like we're going to see, hundreds or dozens of stores right after the turn of the year. It's going to take them a while to open these, but I do think that they're going to get the first one open either right before or right after the turn of the year. I think in places where it's a little easier to get permits and it's going to be easier for them to do their construction, you'll see a few more open as we get through Q1. But I don't think you're going to see a plethora opening very quickly. Number one, it's just going to take DASNY a while to build and upfit the dispensaries, excuse me, that they are going to want to open. And it doesn't look like we're going to see the other licenses until later in the year. So I just think it's going to take a bit of time for those stores to open. I think you may see a few in a burst at the beginning of the year or at the end of the year here, very beginning of next year. But then I think it'll probably be a little slower going. Will a dispensary need a license to deliver? Is the second half of the question. It's very interesting how that's going to work out. It's not really clear yet. We're going to see from regulation how that's going to work out. If it were up to me, the way I would probably make it work is I would let every dispensary apply for one delivery license so that yes, the dispensary could indeed deliver. I would make it such that that delivery license for the dispensary was only valid for products from that dispensary. In other words, the dispensary getting a delivery license would not be able to deliver for other dispensaries. And then the standalone delivery licensee will be able to deliver for any dispensary that they would want to partner with. I'm still holding out hope that the delivery guys will also be able to hold their own inventory, although unfortunately, the signs that I'm getting is that is unlikely. So if the CCB is not going to let the delivery licensees hold their own inventory, then I think the way it's going to need to work to have any chance for the standalone delivery license to be viable is that the CCB lets dispensaries get one delivery license, but only for their own dispensary. And then they let standalone standalone delivery license holders be able to partner with any dispensary they want to partner with to deliver, and deliver from as many as they're able to partner with and then go and deliver from. So we'll see if that's what the Cannabis Control Board wants to do. All right, let's go to a question or two from previous sessions. Here's a question about package design. As we all know, we should be hearing very soon from the Cannabis Control Board about what they want to do with the packaging regulations. But in the meantime, will the ill-advised proposed packaging regulations apply only to businesses located in New York or all cannabis sold in the state? I'm designing right now for local legal cannabis clients who also sell out-of-state products in their stores. Won't this create a huge unfair on-shelf advantage for out-of-state packaging? And the answer for that question is no, it's not a huge unfair advantage because there will be no out-of-state packaging on New York State shelves. It's very simple. Any cannabis that is sold in a legal dispensary, regulated dispensary here in the state of New York, will be selling cannabis that was grown in the state of New York by a New York licensed cultivator who I hope will be following New York cultivation rules. That cannabis will be processed and put into its packaging by a licensed New York State processor, who I also hope is following New York State processing rules, and including the advertising and packaging rules. And in doing so, they will be following New York's packaging rules. There will be no out-of-state packaging. There will be no out-of-state cannabis brought into New York and sold at a regulated dispensary. There will be no cannabis sold here in regulated dispensaries in New York with the little California cannabis logo. That won't happen. It's only going to happen in the illegal bodega dispensaries that we see everywhere in the city right now. It will not happen in the regulated dispensaries. In the regulated dispensaries, you will only see New York product, grown in New York, processed in New York, and advertised and packaged based on New York advertising and packaging rules. So I do think that the rules were a bit draconian. I would like to see them liberalized. Particularly, I want to see the word sticky buds on my cannabis packaging. So I hope they change those rules about not allowing certain words. The 5 words you can't say on cannabis packaging, very similar to George Carlin's 7 dirty words you can't say on television. I hope they loosen those rules. But whichever way it goes, it doesn't matter what you're designing for other states. You're going to need to redesign for New York, and you're going to have to follow the New York packaging requirements for anything that gets sold in a regulated dispensary here in New York. There will not be any regulated dispensary here in New York that is selling anything other than in-state New York State cannabis products. There will not be cannabis products sold in regulated stores here in New York brought in from producers that produce them out of state. All right, let's see what we go on. Let's do another question here from a previous session. Will cultivators be required to process prepackaged flower through a processor, or will they be allowed to break flower down into prepackaged units? Can they make, basically the question is, can they make pre-rolls or packages of flower without a processing license? And so the answer to that is, in the short term, the conditional processors will be indeed able to process prepackaged flower and pre-rolls as part of the law that the legislature passed in creating the conditional cultivator and conditional processor. It does look like they are allowing the cultivator to do some minimal processing as far as pre-rolls and prepackaged flower, and making that available to dispensaries. What one would think will be the conditional adult use retail dispensaries that are coming online at the end of the year or at some point in the future. So the conditional cultivators will be able to do that until next summer, or I think until until technically next summer starts. Someone on the thread today may know more exactly, but I believe it's June 30th or July 1st when they can do it through. Maybe it's July 31st. I can't remember the exact date, but it's at some point next summer. But after that point, anyone that wants to do prepackaged flower or pre-rolls after that point will have to go through a processor. The cultivator will be able to dry their buds and cure their buds and have everything ready for the processor, but pre-rolls will be in the domain of the processor once we get through this little exception period where the conditional cultivators will be able to do some limited processing on their own to make product available. Question from the comments today. I have my brand trademark, Budfellas, as a clothing brand, and marijuana. My guess was if you did it as the only way you got it federally was as a federal trademark was as a clothing brand. Perhaps you could file here in New York as a cannabis brand, but as strictly to get it as a federal mark, you got it as a clothing brand. So it depends on what you mean by, so the question is, will I have a problem with our name? And if you got a federal trademark, then you will not have a problem anywhere in the U.S. with your name for clothing. You will not be able to enforce it against cannabis products, most likely. But for clothing products, you almost certainly will be able to enforce. Here in New York, if you got a trademark like that, you would be able to enforce here in New York for both clothing and cannabis, as long as you got cannabis as one of your trademark classes in your trademark filing here in New York. Again, there are federal trademarks and state trademarks, and the protection you will get will be highly dependent on which mark you get and what state you got it in. All right. As we all know, there were home grow comments posted. We've got all the stuff about home grow, particularly for medical, coming out. My thoughts on it, just general big picture, as we all know, in every state that has ever legalized adult use cannabis, the medical program in that state has immediately become the bastard stepchild of the cannabis program in that state. I think, unfortunately, we're seeing a little bit of that here in New York. I've continued to hear problems of people having issues registering their medical cards, of just all kinds of problems in the medical program. This home cultivation one, I think, is one that they could have dealt with much quicker and much happier, and just get it done with already. Let's get the medical folks growing. It really is crazy that it's taken this long to come up with a proper paradigm for medical folks to be able to grow their own cannabis, or for their caregivers to grow their own cannabis. So, I'm not terribly optimistic that, particularly as all the focus these days is on the adult use market with the conditional adult use retail dispensary license, with the forthcoming regs for all the 9 standard licenses. I am just concerned that we're going to continue to see the medical program here in the state just kind of get, short shrift, so to speak. I'm only hopeful that they will hurry up. I know we do have the comments posted for the home grow. It does seem somewhat conflicting with some of the things in the law. It is what it is. let's just get done. Let's get medical folks growing already. I mean, I know there are a lot of folks that think, you know, worst thing is worse than we'd rather have nothing than a bad thing. I'm kind of in a position now where, frankly, let's just get this done already. Let's get the medical folks their medicine, right? If the MOs are not, if the ROs are not going to open everywhere across the state, and we're not going to open any more stores or give anybody any more license to open any more ROs, let's just get this, home grow done for the medical folks and their caregivers, so we don't have to deal with these issues that they're dealing with anymore. Let's just get it done and get it over with, right? All right, let's do one more question here today, and then I think we're going to be done. Would like your take on whether you think OCM will cap the number of allowed dispensaries to operate, or will they follow other places that have had uncapped limits? So let's be clear, it's not a limitless number. I was actually working with one of my clients today, and they were like, do you think it's a risk to us that there's going to be an unlimited number of dispensary licenses in New York? And I just want folks to be careful about it. It's not that there's going to be an unlimited number. The state's going to do, hopefully, what I think is very smart. And they're going to look at the market. They're going to try to meet the needs of the market. So at first, they'll probably give out licenses a bit quicker because they just need to get going. And we know that they're going to need lots of dispensaries. The question is, what is that upper limit number? So I think at first they're going to give a lot out, and then they'll probably start slowing down a bit as they see how the market needs get met. If they give out a bunch of licenses and there's still lines out the door at every dispensary for, hours on end, then they're going to give out more licenses very quickly. Instead, if you start to see a price decline, and in every market that we've ever seen, somewhere around year 3, the flower price collapses. It's happening in Michigan. It started early this year in Michigan, and you can see what's going on in Michigan right now. But I think this is an excellent tool for the Cannabis Control Board to potentially use, and that if you see price spikes and demand not getting fulfilled by supply, then you give out more licenses. And if you see price collapses, and if you see way oversupply in cannabis, then you would give out fewer licenses, or you would certainly slow down your role of giving out cannabis licenses. So it's not that there's like an infinite number of licenses, and we're not Illinois or Connecticut, where there's an artificial cap, which creates an artificial scarcity on the pricing and the demand. And what happens? Somebody gets a license and turns around and sells it for $1 billion, in the secondary market. I get that's a little hyperbolic. You don't have to write me, but you get my point. So I do think that they're going to try to play it smart. They're going to try to give out licenses very slowly at first to make sure they get it right. And that, I mean, very slowly at very first. And then I think quickly they'll spool it up to where they really want to increase the pace of giving out licenses. And then as they see how the market matures and how it plays out, they will make decisions on what the ultimate number of licenses will be. All right, so I think that's it for questions this week. I do want to make mention, if you want to go look at my LinkedIn feed, we posted the first step in our justice initiative. I think everyone knows I've been talking about the justice initiatives that are the most important things here in the cannabis law to me in New York. That is automatic expungement for everybody whose offenses qualify. Do 440 motions for people whose cannabis convictions are not getting automatically expunged. And also, we got to find out whether or not there are still any nonviolent cannabis offenders incarcerated in the state of New York. So if you go to newyorkjustice.org, or if you look in my LinkedIn feed, you can look at the rave cards that we're going to start giving out in communities that were disproportionately impacted by cannabis enforcement here in New York City. For start, I'm thinking about places in the Bronx, places in Queens, places in uptown Manhattan, places in Brooklyn, places in Staten Island that were disproportionately impacted by cannabis enforcement. These are places where I'm going to find a disproportionate number of folks with cannabis convictions, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure that those folks know that either their convictions are getting expunged, but they need to go to the courthouse and get their certificate of disposition, that if their convictions are not getting expunged, that they need to file a 440 motion to try and get them expunged. And we also see if there's anybody still in jail in the state of New York for nonviolent cannabis offense, because they all got to come home. All right, so go to newyorkjustice.org, look at the rave cards that I posted in my LinkedIn feed, share them with everyone you know. Anyone you know that has a cannabis conviction in the state of New York needs to know about this. We're going to deal with it, and we're going to get it done. So thank you, everybody. If you're not currently a connection of mine, please reach out on LinkedIn. Let's do a connection request, and we'll see you next week at 4:20. Every Wednesday at 4:20. Ask me anything about cannabis legalization in New York. So we'll see you in New York. Everybody, see you next week, and everybody have a great afternoon. Bye now.